Okay, so this is the first video that we will have for this VBA series, and in this video we are going to discuss about how we can enable the developer tab, and second thing is that we are going to look at how we can do a macro recording, macro, right. So third things here we are going to explore is that why macro recording goes wrong, right? And also the fourth one is that how to read the code, the VBA code. Okay, so over here we are going to discuss these 4 items, and then in the next videos we are going to talk about the codes a little bit in a little bit more details on how we can actually write the codes. Of course, over here we will probably have to like explain what is a VBA, right? So VBA is actually standing for Visual Basic for applications. So that means when we talk about this VBA, actually you can do it in Excel, right, or Word, or like PowerPoint. Okay, so you have like you can actually apply this VBA in Excel, Word, PowerPoint. You can even ask use VBA to open up the PDF file, for example. So, but those are like more advanced stuff that we will discuss in the future videos. Okay, so today we are going to talk about all these kind of things in a simple way first. Okay, so first, what is developer tab? Whatever you have on top here, right? So following the cursor, my mouse cursor, home tab until view tab, they are the default one. And this developer tab is where you can actually record macro and do like view codes, things like that. So we will go through how we can enable this one together later. Whatever you have over here, they are called ribbon. So each of the tabs here are default one until view tab. So you can enable developer tab from Excel. You don't have to install anything. And if you have other softwares that utilize Excel install, or if you have installed any other Excel add-ins, maybe you will have additional tabs here, right? So those are for the add-ins. Okay, now we go to the file and then option. So under Excel option, you can look at this customized ribbon. So you see over here, by default it should be something like this. So you see no more developer tab, option, customized ribbon. Customized ribbon, again ribbon refer to everything here, and then we just tick this one to ensure that developer tab will be here later on, and you click OK. So you have this developer tab. Okay, then once you have developer tab, again this is a standard syllabus. First thing we are going to explore is the record macro. Record macro is basically record macro is basically a way for you to repeat whatever you have done earlier. So let us take one example, right? So you see now I'm at I have selected G1, so I want to fill up 1 to 10 over here, right? So I click this record macro and then I click OK. I key in 1, enter, 2, enter, then I select 1, 2 or G1, G2, right? So I can move my cursor to the bottom right, click and drag until the 10 is I'm at row 10, release. You see I have these 10 numbers here. So that is what I want. Then I click stop recording. so no issue, right? Okay, let me delete this one. One thing is that let's say if I delete, you see I can undo, right? No issue. When you look at the on the top here, following my cursor, so undo, redo, they are in blue color, so that means you can undo, redo. See, but if they are in gray color, that means you can't. It is either the latest change or the earliest change, or no history found for these two functions if it is in gray color. So one thing that you need to be slightly careful is that when you are running a macro, that means a VBA codes, then the history here will be clear. So if you are developing a complicated models or template, then probably you want to make sure you save a copy first before you actually run the codes. Otherwise, if the codes goes wrong, then you won't be able to undo it. Okay, so let's see if we just click at G1, right? So if you just run the code, to run the code, then you can click this macro button, the second button, and then you see macro 1 is the macro that we have recorded. Then you click run. 1 to 10 nicely shown here, right? So no issue. Again, after you have run this code, you see you can't undo and redo anymore. Okay, so let's say if we select at F1 now, instead of G1, I select at F1. So now the question is that will the 10 numbers being displayed here, or it will be still here, right? So that is a question that we want to explore or investigate. So we try first, and then you click at this macro, same thing, we run again. So it is not 1 to 10 here, it is also not 1 to 10 here, but it becomes something like this, right? So this behavior is a little bit weird because we have recorded that we key in 1, 2, and then autofill to 10, right? So that is what we have done earlier. Let me just type in 1, and then we type in 2, right? And then we autofill, no, we select first, right? That is what we have done earlier. Select A1 and A2, right? Then we autofill this thing to A10. That is sorry, not A, but G, right? So this one also same, G. So we type in 1, 2, and then G1, G2, something like that. Okay. So if we select A1 first, and then now we click record macro, we try one more time on macro recording, performing the same task, key in 1 to 10. Okay, so click record macro. So now we explore this window a little bit. So this is the macro name. We can change it a little bit, like call second version, right? So you can change it to any other names, and then this one is that where you want to store this macro. So keep it as this workbook. Description is just it can be anything, right? So it's like anything or your comments, so that you know what this macro is actually doing. If you don't want, you can leave it empty, no issue. Shortcut key here is that you don't have to click this button and then bring up this window and then run the macro. You can use your keyboard shortcut or key combination to execute this code. So for example, if you put in like alphabet, sorry, not alphabet, all these kind of characters like comma, full stop, it doesn't work. You have to, like for example, right? So it must be a letter. That means like Control A, this is lowercase. If you need uppercase, then it should be like this. So Control Shift A, then you click OK, right? So now click at G1. Remember we want it to be at G1, right? So click G1 and then type in 1, 2, select these two cells, drag it to 10, stop recording. Okay, so now delete everything. We try one more time. Click at this one. So you see second version is what we have. Comments is here. Then you can click run. Looks good. Try selecting F1 and then run the macro. So we can run the macro by using Control Shift A right just now. So you see, using the keyboard I can also do the same thing, and in this version it does the job correctly now. So one more time, no matter where we select, it is always okay. It looks good now. So you can also run it from here, double click this second version. So you see everything is here, nicely arranged, no issue. So what is the difference between this first macro and second macro? Macro 1, right? And also this second macro, macro 2. So the difference is that if you can recall what we have done earlier, this one we select G1 before we record the macro 1, then we type in 1, 2, 3. But for second macro we actually, so second macro we actually select G1 after we have recorded the macro, right? So the difference here is that imagine when you are now at G1, like for this case we select, then we record. What happened is that we type in a 1 and then you press enter. You see the cell automatically go to G2, and then you type in the 2 and then you drag like this, right? So you see like this, no issue. But problem is that if let's say now you are here and you run this macro, you see this macro doesn't include this select G1. So what happened is that 1 will be entered here, right? So type in 1, then we type in 1. The next step, when you press enter, it doesn't go to F2, but it should be going to G2, because just now you imagine type in 1, so G2 is selected, you see. So this is also recorded. So in this case it will become something like this, and then 2 here, enter, then we select these 2 and drag it to row number 10. That's why you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over here. Okay, so that is also why when you are doing macro recording, you need to be very careful. So usually after I have done the recording, I will always check the code to ensure that everything is just nice. Okay, so now for macro 2, actually no issue. You see, even we select E9, right, because first cell is always first action is always selecting G1. So I will always click here first, press 1, 2, and then drag it. So that is the process that you have inside this macro 2, right? So that's why macro 2 always run perfectly. So that is the reason why we are saying that macro recording sometimes might be a little bit weird, or the behavior, it behaves differently when we compare to when we record it. So usually it is affected by this selected cell or the active cell. So now we go to the code. To view the code, you can actually go to this one, view code. You can click here and then you will have this window. Okay, or instead of doing that, you can also view code, right? You can also use keyboard shortcut alternate plus F11. You can bring up this window also. So once you have this window, you can see on the right hand side here, they are like blank space, or probably you will see codes there. Ignore that first. Move to the left hand side, you have like 2 parts here. First part is the working tree. So all the add-ins usually will be on the top. So like in my case here, I have this solver add-in. I enable it, so you will, this Excel version has solver, so most of you should have this solver as well. So solver.xlam. So xlam is the extension, file extension for Excel add-in. Okay. Then VBA project book 1 here refer to this Excel file book 1. Okay. Right. So inside this book 1, what object we have? We have sheet 1, which is this one, worksheet 1. And then this workbook refer to this workbook, everything. Okay. Modules here, they are actually inserted because we have recorded macro earlier. So if you double click this module 1, you will see the two codes here. Right. First code, macro 1, because we never changed the name. Second code is the second version. And then we have also the keyboard shortcut enabled earlier. So whatever you have on this apostrophe, the first character here, indicates that they are actually a command. So if I want to comment out this thing, then it will be a command. So green color is a command, and command will not be executed by this compiler. Okay, so close this one. Let me just open up a new workbook so that we can see the difference. Right, so this is book 2. This is book 1, right? So I have 2 Excel workbook now. Bring up this one using alternate F11. You will see that now you have actually 2 VBA projects. And you see this one, you don't have the modules. So by default, any new blank workbook should be something like this. So inside the bracket is always the name. Like for example, this sheet 1 is the name. But how about this one, right? So sheet 1 bracket sheet 1. You know that this is a name, which is referring to here. Okay. Then what is this thing? Let's try. If I rename this one as testing, then again bring up this VBA editor, you will be able to see that the name here, sheet 1, changed to testing. You see, it changed accordingly. And then this sheet 1 is like the ID or the counter. That means by default it should be sheet 1, sheet 2, as long as you add new worksheet, so you will have the new one. So like for example, I add one more, right? And then go to this VBA code. You will see 2 Excel objects now, excluding the workbook. So again, this is the name, this is the counter. It is like the ID that is always unique throughout the whole tree here. Inside the whole book 1, it should be unique. Okay, but in if you want to change this name, you can actually change it. Like for example, over here. So on the left, bottom left here, this part, they are actually the properties of what you have selected. For example, if you select workbook, then this is properties of this workbook. If you select module, then it's properties of module. Okay, so if you click sheet 1, then you can actually change the name. Like of course you cannot have space like A space B, something like that. So it doesn't work. You cannot have space. So usually if you need a space, then we will say WS is the worksheet and then underscore to replace the space lah. So that is what we do usually. So worksheet 1, something like that. Then you see it will be renamed as WS1 and then testing. So it depends on whether you want to rename it or not. Okay, you can keep it as sheet 1 as per the original one, no issue, because the display will not be displaying this name, this ID. Okay, but the difference here, we will talk about that later. So why we have like the name and the worksheet name. I mean, this is a display name, this is like we call it as ID, although we know that this is the properties is under name, it is not ID. So to differentiate that, we call this thing as name, this thing as ID, easier for us to identify. Okay, so we will look at this thing later in the next video on how we do referencing to worksheet, workbook, and even like the cell range and so on. So over here now we look at the codes. We have 2 codes here. So this horizontal line will be automatically display. Every time you have the end sub, and then you have a new sub here. So what is a sub? Right, so sub is like a function, or is like a program. So in this case, we don't talk about that in too details yet. So imagine from beginning the sub, you always start from a sub and then end sub. So this is like one whole block, and this block, except for the first line and the last line, whatever inside, actually they are for the second macro that we have recorded. So these are the codes for the second macro. So this is indicating starting of a sub, and this is indicating end of a sub. So a sub is actually the subroutine. Okay, and then whatever after apostrophe, they are actually the what is it called, comments. So these are the comments you can delete it, it won't affect the codes. So you can add new comments like testing, this is testing, this is comment, right? So no issue, and it won't affect the code. So now we could look at how we can view the code. So if you think that the font size is too small, you can actually edit it, view, and then where is it? Okay, doesn't matter, I can't remember where is the font size, but we will go back to this one later. So we can actually change the font size, because I seldom change the font size here. So if you compare first macro and second macro, you can see that the difference is the G1 here, which is similar with what we have mentioned earlier over here, right? So we say that you have the select G1 in the second macro, you see. So the first macro, we directly type in a 1 because we select before we start the recording. So that's why active cell equal to 1. Active cell means that the cell that you are currently selecting. So like for example, in this case, the active cell is L6. Okay. So we are passing the value 1 to this active cell, and then we select G2, like what we have demonstrated earlier, and then we pass 2 to the active cell. Active cell is again G2 because you select it, then this is the active cell, right? Then we select G1, G2 and drag it down. So that is the whole code here. Of course, same thing to second one for all this except for the first line. So you can actually correct this code by adding the first line, like range G1. We can actually copy from the second one and paste it here also can. So by adding this line, you see we can actually add it back. So by adding this line, we are saying that okay, now I'm adding this one back to here, right? So no issue. And then if you close it, okay, now try running this one again. Put it here. You see everything is okay now. So that is also how we can actually do a macro recording. And then of course we always try to test it, view the code, check it, and then the last one is to save it. So you can save the file like this, because this file has the macro inside it. So when you save, like for example, if you click save, then let me save it as desktop, right? Over here, you are not you shouldn't save it as XLSX over here, because if you are doing that, then you are saying that okay, I don't want the macro that I've created earlier to be saved inside this file. So like I'm saying this is a first example, right? So if I click this one, you see this sentence or this warning is basically saying that if you continue to save, if you click yes, then it will be macro free. That means whatever code that you have written, it will not be saved, so it will be gone, and you can't retrieve it back. So click no if you want the code, and then change the file type to the second one, macro enabled workbook. Okay, so again, XLSM is the file extension for macro. You see that macro enabled with M. If it is Excel, then X. Okay, so if it is add-in, then it is either XLA or XLAM. That is a few common ones. Then if you click save, then this file will be saved. So bear in mind, if you want to keep the code, you should always save it as macro enabled workbook. Then close the file. Right, this one we don't need it, close it. So the file is here. You see, you will have one escalation mark when you are using if you don't change the themes. So you have escalation mark here to indicate that this is actually macro enabled workbook. Double click to open this one. When you open a macro enabled workbook, you will see something like this. Security warning, macros have been disabled, and you can enable it. So reason for this thing is that macro can be potentially dangerous. That means someone might have written the code, and if you don't check it, they can actually use the code to access certain of your information and then pass it to internet or send it out back to him, things like that. That's why, or it can maybe change the files or delete the files that you have on your PC. So that's why usually by default it is disabled, and then if you want, you just enable it, then the macro will be okay. So but of course, unless you know what are the macro, what the macros are doing, then you can enable it directly or immediately, like what we have done earlier. Otherwise, try to always look at the code to see, at least glance through to see what is actually happening. Okay, so if you go to file and then option again, then trust center here, right? So if you don't want to have these macro things, then you can also go to this trust center setting, and then macro setting, right? So you see under trust center, okay, let me put it here a bit, right? So under Excel option, trust center setting, then you will have this window. By default, it should be disable all macros with notification, or without notification also possible. So if you want, you can also like enable all macros. This is not recommended, but like because potentially dangerous code can run. So this is like what we have mentioned earlier. You can actually accidentally run some code that is deleting your files, things like that. Okay, so if you click OK, click OK again, close this file. Now we open up this Excel file again. You won't see the warning here anymore, right? So if you want, you can enable them for all, but personally I won't recommend that. So you can click at this one unless you know that you won't be running the macros from other source. So otherwise you can choose disable macros with notification, so that when you need it, then only you enable it. Okay, so click OK. Then if I close this one, open up this one again. Oh, sorry, this file, because it has been enabled earlier, so the Excel has recognized this file. So if I have a new file coming in, then once I have enabled, I mean they will always show the warning first before I can run the code. So that would be actually better. Okay, so that is the end of this first video. In the next video, we are going to look at certain things like how to do referencing to workbook, right? So like what is a sub, and function. We are also going to look at what is private and public sub or function. So we will be looking at items like this, and then from here afterwards, then you should be able to write simple codes. And of course, as we progress, we will introduce more concepts, and then we will try to have more complicated mini project. Then we slowly build up our skills together. Okay, so that is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. So see you in the next video. Bye.